All right, we've got which card game is actually the hardest to play?
A while ago, there was some drama about which game was more difficult to play, Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh!
I remember this. Yeah, I remember this specific discussion. TLDR, basically, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the hardest game to play, but that's not like indicative of quality. If your game is harder, that doesn't make it a better game by default because it requires more IQ points to master. Like, that's not at all like the case, right? Because even simple games have complexity to them, and even difficult games have more complexity to them. Look at chess, for example. Chess, at a base level, is a very simple game. You have pieces, they move X number of spots, and the goal is to take out the opponent's king. It's a really easy, simple game, conceptually. But there are, you know, literal thousands of years of theory and strategy attached to it. So there is beauty in simplicity as well. That's not like a checkmate. Pun intended.
This drama went a few places, but the details there are less interesting than the overall question. What makes a card game hard? Is it the complexity
Gardevoir has an ability called Despair Ray. I love that.
of the individual turns, the complexity of the rule systems, or the multi-turn strategies that decks need to employ? Players from each of the three big card games will claim their game is the deepest and most skill-testing. But
I think anyone with any integrity who actually genuinely wants to engage with this discussion, who does actually have some proficiency in all of the card games, Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, will be good faith enough in their argument to say that, yes, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the most complicated, hardest game to play. But again, that's not like a positive thing, necessarily. That's not like a point to Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, we have the hardest game. It's like, yeah, your game's hard. That doesn't make it more fun, right? Like, so yeah, like, logically, objectively, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the hardest game, but that's not a better game by virtue of being harder.
is there any truth to these claims? Today, we're going to go over what makes Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon,
does hardest
and even
even mean in this
Magic the
context?
Gathering
Well, I guess we'll watch the video and find out
how they compare to each other, and see if we can find an answer to the question, what's the hardest card game? One major aspect of a game's difficulty is its complexity, and that's an obvious place to start this discussion. Starting with Yu-Gi-Oh!, the game has many things that make it very difficult to get into and
You know what's really funny? You look at a card like Stratos, and it's like the most basic vanilla type of Yu-Gi-Oh! Card, right? People refer to cards as Stratoses, right? It's an on-summon monster that searches a card from your archetype, right? People regularly, until today, will call cards Rotas. They'll call them Stratoses, right? And you just look at this card, and it's like, this is a very complicated card compared to other card games, right? Like, it's got levels, it's got an attribute, it's got a type, which already by itself, I think, is more stats unrelated to the text than other card games. I don't think Hearthstone has attributes and types. They have, like, types, but they don't also have a secondary thing. Like, there's no attribute in Hearthstone, right? I know they have, like, Murloc and Beast and all that kind of stuff, but they don't have, like, another type on top of that. I guess they have classes, I suppose. Yeah, that does actually make sense. There's colors, and then you come to the text of this, and it's like, this thing has like 2 effects and an explanation of the effect. Normal or special, you can activate this. The when is important, by the way, compared to the if. Destroy spells up to the number of heroes, except this. Non-targeting versus targeting, so that's another type of complexity you need to understand. Add a hero monster from deck to your hand. That is another type of complexity. You can add a hero. Some cards add cards that are in their archetype, but not in their archetype. Closest thing I can think of, for example, is like Lunalight, right? Lunalight doesn't have a way to search Lunalight Perfume because it's Luna Space Light compared to Luna Light. See? Lawyer game, right? Like, I don't think other games have these, like, really tiny, annoying, specific nuances and stuff like that. Now, I know the new support actually does let you search Perfume, which is hilarious, but previously, Lunalight never actually had a way to search Perfume.
master. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is famous for its high-powered combos and very complex rules, making it infamously difficult for new players to pick up. For one, the game has a ton of different summoning mechanics that new players have to learn. Fusion, Ritual, Synchro, Xyz, Pendulum, and Link summoning all come with their own quirks and rules, and to really play the game, you'll eventually have to learn how all of them work.
Yeah, I don't think other card games have this, do they? Like what? Magic has like colors. Hearthstone has like classes. This has like fusion, ritual, synchro, like extra deck, main, like yeah, oh my god, like it's just at a base level. These don't even need to have text on them, and that's already a lot to think about.
On top of that, learning how to play a
probably don't
modern
have to learn
Yu-Gi-Oh
Pendulum.
deck is
Shut
something
up,
that
Gage.
takes quite a bit of effort. Every Yu-Gi-Oh card is incredibly dense with effects text, and beyond knowing what every card does, you also need to know how a deck's cards interact.
This is a what 2016 card, I think. By the way, this card's almost 10 years old.
With each other. This, at least for new players, usually amounts to either slowly building a base of knowledge by building your own decks, or by doing research into how certain decks are played. The latter being more common. It takes a lot of time to learn how to pilot a Yu-Gi-Oh deck with anything even approximating a degree of skill. The next most complex game of the three is Magic, which is debatably as complex as Yu-Gi-Oh. Try asking.
I don't think Magic is like mechanically that complex, right? Like I feel like I could pick up Magic and like play, right? Like I can activate cards in a way that would allow me to legally play the cards. I wouldn't be very good at the game, obviously, but I could play the cards physically. In Yu-Gi-Oh, I think you would definitely be struggling to like, you know, just activate cards without making like illegal moves constantly. You know? I think like the keywords of Magic is really where like a lot of the difficulty is can be sometimes, right? It's like there is a lot of keywords and it's just kind of like memorization, but once you get it type of thing.
A new player how humility and opalescence interact if you want to see proof of just how complicated Magic can be.
All creatures lose all abilities and have 1/1 base power and toughness 1/1. Toughness is like armor basically, right? Each other global enchantment is a creature with power and toughness, each equal to its converted mana cost. It is still an enchantment. Okay, so humility then becomes a creature that is 4/4. All creatures lose all abilities and have base power and toughness. So then this thing turns this into a monster, but then this thing is skill draining itself so that it's no longer a monster. And that's kind of like the paradox, I guess. Did I get it right? It's something like that. It's like that Jinzo like loop thing we showed earlier this stream. There are layers. Wait, Magic has a thing called layers? So what is it? So what is the answer to this solution? It's not legal, right? I assume it's like you just can't have both active at the same time, surely, because it just creates a paradox. Answer is 42. You need to know like 20 layers. It depends which plate got first. Oh, it's funny because that's kind of like similar to Yu-Gi-Oh for some rulings. It depends on like which card was active first. Magic can generate some really hard to parse board states. Layer also depends on the order of play. Layers are worse than the damage step. Magic calls their chain link stacks. Yeah. Layers and sub-layers, in this case, depending on what order those cards came out first. Interesting.
Of course, these types of rule nightmares don't pop up in most games of Magic. This is a purposeful design choice on the part of Magic's designers, as this type of complexity is seen as a barrier to entry for new players. However, even when you ignore the heavy complexity of Magic's rule system, the actual rules of Magic are still more complicated than
I'm like
many
genuinely
other
excited
games.
to play some Magic
Magic's
Graph
mana
this week,
system
by the way.
is by
Like,
far
I'm really
the
looking
most
forward to
complex
it.
of any card game with such a system. In order to cast a spell of Magic,
Like,
you
I
have
love
to produce
Magic
enough
conceptually,
mana
I
from
just
your
never
lands.
really
But on
tried
top
to
of
kinda
having
sit
enough
down and
mana,
play it.
you also need mana of the right colors. A card like Rogue Refiner requires at least 1 green and 1 blue mana, and you have to properly tap your land to create
This stuff
the
always confused me. Because, like, until, like, you know, I guess, like, up until the last time with Magic, like, this was really complex to kind of wrap my head around, right? Because this card, it says 1. Oh, you can't see. It says 1, but it's actually 3 cost. But in order to use it, you need to use a green and a blue cost mana, and then one of the mana can be anything. Like, this always tripped me up because I was always get like the numbers incorrect and stuff.
right colors of mana. On top of keeping track of your colors of mana in order to cast your spells properly, you have cards like Lumbering Falls and Mirror Pool that have other useful activated abilities.
And this stuff also didn't really make sense to me either. You can tap any kind of color mana, to then add a green or blue mana to your mana pool. So essentially, oh, you have to tap itself. You tap the land. Right, but okay, so you tap itself, so it kind of pays for itself, it just becomes a different color, is the benefit, really, of this, right? That's like the practical application of this. It has no cost. It's a land. Oh, right, because it's just using itself. Right, I see. And then for 2 generic mana, 1 green and 1 blue, Lumbering Falls becomes a 3/3 green and blue emerald creature with hexproof until the end of turn. It is still a land. So it's also a land and it's a creature? And you can pay it. Oh, shit, dude. Yep, still a land. Okay. Is this a good card? It seems strong. It's also untargetable, right? Is what hexproof is?
Which you need to keep untapped in order to use. This alone creates a level of complexity while playing before you even get to the actual spells you're casting. Magic's mana system also introduces a type of decision.
So what you're noticing, by the way, is like the good thing about what I just did there is I'm just reading the card and it is explaining the card. Like, I'm getting it. Like, I haven't played Magic in years at this point, but like I'm getting it just by reading the card, right? I know that sounds crazy, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, sometimes reading the card doesn't really tell you how the card works, right? Like, there's a lot of between the lines things in Yu-Gi-Oh that you can't really get from a card unless you just truly understand the mechanics of it, right? Like targeting and untargeting and timing. PSET is a big one. Like, if you're just reading a card as like an average Yu-Gi-Oh player, you might not know the difference between and if you do. Then, also. Those are really important terms. And I'm not using this as a positive or saying like that makes it better than Magic. That's a bad thing. That's not a good thing. But it's just good to know that in Magic and Hearthstone, if I read a card, I can get the card. You literally misinterpreted the tap symbol as well, though. Yeah, but comparatively, that's like getting one thing wrong compared to Yu-Gi-Oh's like 15 different things wrong you could potentially get wrong in a card. Which is still wrong, technically, but like, you know, I just feel like there's way more pitfalls in Yu-Gi-Oh compared to reading a Magic card.
Making that Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon don't
Now read
have.
a Saga or Planeswalker.
As rather than choosing just the order in which you play your cards, but instead only have so many resources that you can spend on your cards however you wish. This also has an impact on how you interact with your opponent.
Is this card still good, by the way? This is the most basic vanilla blue card in Magic, right? Is it still played? It is just hasn't been power crept. It's not like out of the it's still around. It's just like this is their Ash Blossom basically for blue, and it's just been in the game for, right? The better ones aren't legal. I mean, I guess you can't power creep Ash Blossom in some way.
As most of your instant speed interaction or quick effect interaction comes in the form
Mana
of
Drain is a
instant
power crept
spells.
version.
In order to even
Okay,
be
I gotta
able to
read that really quick. Mana Drain Magic. All right, Yu-Gi-Oh player rates Yu-Gi-Oh card. Mana Drain. This is the same cost, right? 2 mana instant. Counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add X to your mana pool where X is the casting cost of the target spell. That's absurd. So if you negate a 2-cost spell with this, it just pays for itself, basically. Like, you just did it for free, essentially. That's absurd. Not legal in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Alchemy, Pauper. Also, by the way, Magic, you guys have way too many fucking formats, okay?
interact with your opponent on their turn, you have to choose to not spend your mana on your turn, which is yet another thing you have to consider when going about your turn. Still, most Magic decks are easier to pick up and play than a modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck, especially once you already know how to play a game of Magic. And finally, the least complex of these three games is Pokémon. Now, while the Pokémon TCG is the least complex of the three games,
you know why Pokemon was like really hard for me to like understand? There's a lot of math in Pokemon. Like a lot of math. I don't get like resistances. Like, you know when you have to like add like the resistance to like the like, you know, like there's way too much to just do an attack. It's kind of I don't get it, man. It was hard.
that's not to say it's simple. there's still quite a bit you need to keep
Old man
track of
could
on a
use his
given turn.
fingers.
While there aren't any cost to play
Well, I don't know how to
cards, you
count,
still
but it's
have
like the
many
numbers sometimes
restrictions.
like...
Item cards, which can be played
Don't
from
they
hand
act
for
like
no cost as
percentages
many
more than
times as you
like
want in a
straight up
turn,
additions and
have less
subtractions
impact than
sometimes?
more restricted cards. Supporters may have stronger effects, but
No,
you
am I
can
just
only
making that
play
up?
a single supporter card
To
on
be fair,
each
I've
of your
tried
turns.
Pokemon once.
On top of that,
ever.
Pokemon also have a lot of hard ones per turns, just like Yu-Gi-Oh! That you have to keep track.
Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. Weakness to... Okay, so for example, how does this... So this thing has 180 health, and it's got what? Double weakness to Earth? Or whatever this type is? So if something with 50 tries to hit this, fighting, right? So if a fighting Pokemon hits this, it does 100 damage? That's it? So what happens if 100 hits this with 180? Does it go down to 80? Does it have a cost, or does it recover from that battle? He can double! So it just goes to 80, and then you just have to track that this thing now has... So it's like it has every Pokemon has its own life points, basically, right? You just mark 100 damage on it. You use counters. Okay. Is there like a standard competitive agreement between Pokemon players how much one counter is? Like, is every counter like 10 or something? And then you just put like, what, 8 counters on this or something? You put a dice for 8 on it, I guess? Okay. They use dice. So what would this be? What number? What would you put on this? You'd put... Okay, you wouldn't put the... You would put the damage... The life it has, not the damage it's taken. So you'd put 10. Alright, well, I guess I figured out the damage step in Pokemon. See? Took me about 60 seconds. Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah! We need to watch the Distant Coder lecture.
Track of when you're going about your turn. The evolution mechanic is also something you have to keep in mind. You can only play basic Pokemon from your hand. Then, on the turn after you play the basic, you can evolve it into a Stage 1 Pokemon. And
what does the symbol next to fighting mean here? Cutting wind does 50. What is this? Screech! Normal type? Oh, this is the cost for it, right? So you need fighting energy to use this? Wait, so yeah, you need to give it fighting energy and any energy to be able to use cutting wind. What happens if you use the ability? Does it lose the energy? Does it keep it? Do you detach it or some shit? Is it like an Extreme monster? Like... Okay.
And then finally, it can be evolved into their next Stage 2 versions in a different turn. Then there's the energy mechanic, which is the closest thing to normal summoning or land drops in the other two games. Here, rather than
you
allowing
can
to
use
develop
one
your
energy per
board or
turn,
get
right?
more
In
mana,
Pokemon, that's their
energy
normal
is used
summon.
to pay for your attacks, and it's generally what determines the flow of a game of Pokemon, as if a Pokemon gets knocked out, they lose all their energy. Still, Pokemon is by far the easiest game to pick up of the big three, being the simplest to play on a second-to-second basis.
How do you summon Dragoon in Pokemon?
It's also the only game that doesn't have consistent access to quick effects or instant speed effects.
This is crazy,
When it's
by
your
the way,
turn,
like,
you're the only one
y'all
playing,
just do your
which makes
turn and
navigating your
your
turns
opponent's
far
just waiting.
simpler. You're never
That's
going
crazy
to
to
try
me.
to evolve your Charmander, only for your opponent to solemn judgment you. So, now that we've established which games are most complex, we should know which one is the most difficult, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case. While Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the most complex of the three, that doesn't translate to it being the most deep gameplay. While the combos are complicated and take some getting used to, once you learn how to do a combo in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's not that difficult to perform it in future games. For an example, let's take a look at a typical Snake Eyes combo. The combo for this deck is to use one of your consistency cards to get a Snake Eye Ash. You use it to get the effect of Snake Eye Poplar,
But it's
which
that
also summons itself with its
simple.
own effect. Poplar then adds a Snake Eye Spell Trap, which is usually original Sinful Spoils
Okay,
Snake
so is the rest of this video just Snake Eye combo?
Eye if it wasn't used to start the combo. Then you link off a Poplar for a link 1 and put Poplar into your back row with its effect.
Special
You
summon
use Ash
Poplar,
to set itself
activate
on
your
Poplar to
Poplar.
summon Snake Eye Oak from deck, which reborns Ash. Then you use Oak to send itself in the link.
So this is true in the sense that, like, you could have a very basic understanding of the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you memorize some combos, you can win games against good players. Right? Like, that is true. But the moment that you end up in any sort of game state that is not part of the spreadsheet, you fall apart, right? Like, if your opponent ashes something or bestials something midway through your combo, then, you know, that's where the skill is in Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion. It's being able to improvise, and it's being able to be versatile with your combos against your opponent's interactions. That's where I think a lot of the skill is in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the deep gameplay comes from. I don't really know where the deep gameplay would come from Magic, to be honest with you. Maybe he'll explain. Surely it's not... Does Magic have a normal summon Snake Eye Ash? I think they call it Dredge, don't they?
1 to summon Snake Eye Flameberg Dragon. You send Flameberg and Ash to summon IP Masquerena and trigger Flameberg to resummon 2 of the other snakes. Then you link off one of them in IP to summon Promethean Princess to
Jesus
use her
Christ,
to resummon Flameberg.
Dologs, you don't need to tell us
Flameberg
this.
to put IP in the back row, then link off the Princess and Snake Eye to summon Salamangreat Raging Phoenix. Yes, that is complicated and takes a while to memorize.
This was a terrible combo,
but once
by
you
the
know
way.
what to do, it's not difficult to perform. You do the same thing every time, assuming your opponent doesn't interrupt you with hand traps. And that's where most of the actual skill expression and the most difficult decision making comes in: interaction. The complexity of Yu-Gi-Oh! Combos itself isn't that deep. It's how those combos interact with hand traps and the like, and how combos have to diverge from interactions where the depth comes in. The thing
wasn't even
is,
correct
you can
prefeat.
get that kind of decision making from a game
Okay,
without these
not the point, but it's still
long,
funny.
complicated combos. And there are other types of difficult decision making in Magic and Pokemon that don't exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! And vice versa. Ultimately, it's difficult to say what the hardest of these games is, as they each test very different skills and different people will find
So
these
is he
games
going to
more or
tell
less
me what
difficult to
like
play
deep gameplay
based on
Magic looks
which of
like?
these
Because I'm
skills
actually
they're
really
naturally
curious.
better at. Spoilers, that's the conclusion of this video. And we're not going to crown one of these games.
Damn, still 10 minutes left, huh? Maybe it's the rest of the Snake Eye combo. Maybe he'll show us the post-Fiendsmith line. So I know that in Hearthstone, a lot of the deep gameplay, I think, for context, I got Diamond in Hearthstone. It's the game I've played most for card games that isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! And the skill in Hearthstone felt more kind of like... It definitely felt a lot more formulaic than Yu-Gi-Oh! In some ways. Because when you play against, like, at the time, for example, it's like, okay, I'm playing against Mage. Turn 7, I know that this is potentially the Flame Strike turn. Do I develop my board and instantly play into Flame Strike, or do I hold and wait for the Flame, like, type of thing, right? Like, so, in a very basic explanation, because of the mana in those games, you're very much kind of like, okay, this turn, I'm expecting this deck to play this specific card that's really good on that turn. Like, you want to do the coin for the Keleseth turn 1 in your aggro deck or something back in the day. I think. I could be completely wrong about that. But there's like, it's sort of like on turn 2 or turn 3 or turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, there's like specific checkpoints and cards that you need to be aware of. So all of the skill essentially in Hearthstone was kind of like knowing how to deal with, expecting those checkpoints, and even being able to read based off of the cards in your opponent's hand if they've potentially been holding that card for that turn. And then having a plan for when they do drop Boom on 7 or whenever it was, right? So I don't know if that's like the closest thing I can really relate to in Magic, but I assume Magic is somewhat similar in that way just by virtue of having a mana system, right? Like, you're expecting green to do this play on 5. Did they have the card? Did they draw it? Like, if not, then what other cards could they have in their hand, etc., etc., right? Is it similar in Magic? Board wipes are turn 4 in Magic, so it's kind of similar if you're playing against white. Hearthstone decks are only 30, so every game ends up kind of playing out the same way because the decks are so consistent. Hearthstone's also weird because there's a lot of created cards that spawn from outside of the deck, which is very hard to play around. I think like Christmas Tree Paladin or something was like one of those. You would just like create secrets that were not in the format or something like that. It's like trap cards being set from the ban list, I think, is like what that deck used to do. It got a little bit ridiculous because it was just like these random things. You can't play around everything, especially when it's not in a deck or something. They came from the deck. There was like another deck that like just spawned cards from nowhere, and then you just... It was probably a mage card now that I think about it. Sunfire? Sunwell?
Games as the true hardest game for the smartest players. Part of the reason they've all survived for so long is that the games play very differently and have their own ways of testing players. However, just saying that doesn't mean much. It'd be a lot more interesting to go over the different ways that these games test their players and what makes each one of them more difficult than the others. Returning to Yu-Gi-Oh, since we're on the Yu-Gi-Oh channel for this video, there are 2 types of decision making mostly unique to this game. One is playing with and against hand traps. and the other is trying to break boards. While Magic does have a few cards similar to hand traps, such as Force of Will and its ilk, 0 mana cards.
Isn't this card banned? 5 mana. You may pay 1 and exile a blue from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Oh, that's annoying as fuck. It's a bit minus, but it's another negate that you can use for free. Well, free, quote unquote. You have to you have to go -2 to negate a card effect. Also, does countering in Magic destroy? Like, if my opponent activates an enchantment, I think those are continuous, right? What happens? It goes to the discard pile, correct? It doesn't destroy. It's like negating activation. You can't negate effects. It goes to grave, yes. Doesn't resolve. It never existed. And creatures are technically spells, right? So if my opponent activates a creature's ability, can you use counter on it? And what happens to the creature? Oh, abilities? No. Not the ability, but the casting of it. You can counter monster summons with counter spell. That's kind of broken. So my counter spell, my 2-cost mana, can just delete like a 6-mana creature if they try summon it? That sounds annoying as fuck. Badge boop. Yes, that sounds really fucking annoying. Welcome to
Cards are far less common in the game than hand traps are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not to mention that most decks aren't going to be trying to pull off a crazy combo in Magic, and even the ones that aren't really going to try and play around cards like Force of Will.
What does this card do? 10 Jewels of Agony, 4 mana. Target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Storm. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. Target player loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for this copy. You may choose new targets? But it can only target player. Can you... So this doesn't target creatures, right? I assume this is just like a big burn card, right? You can target yourself? Why would you want to target yourself? Target to lose life, gain life? If 5 cards are played before this card, it just casts itself like 5 extra times. Yeah, so you do 10 damage. It's a big burn, right? Command does multiple players. Oh yeah, that's why they do it that way. Because they know that Commander is like their biggest format. Play 20 cards, play this, GG. Okay, but how are you playing 20 cards in a turn in a game of mana, surely? The thing about Storm is that they want to OTK you. This card was before Commander. This is one of the cards that can be an FTK. They can do that. They have 0 mana cost. They have some loops. It's not as hard as you think. Well, I remember some combos from Hearthstone that involved like a lot of druid shenanigans, and that deck always used to like cheat mana and stuff, so I guess that makes sense.
Same way you'd play around hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Anyone
Often,
been a victim of Maligos
the deck in
OTK?
Yu-Gi-Oh! Is how well it can play around various hand traps. It's worth pointing out that these hand traps all have very different effects to one another. Playing around Ash Blossom is different to playing around Drone Lockbird or Nibiru. However, there's comparatively less variety in hand traps in Magic. You mostly have Force of Will and variants of it, which simply say
Notice how there's only blue cards on the
spell
screen
at the end of the day. There is some variety.
I will say that sometimes that's one of the most like pain point frustrations of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because at least like I guess like in mana games, like there's those certain checkpoints that I mentioned before where like, okay, on turn 5 I know that maybe I should play around Brawl. Turn 7 maybe I should play around Flame Strike, etc., right? In Yu-Gi-Oh! Because everything is turn 1, it's like you can't play around everything. Like there isn't really like a, oh, on this turn, like, this card could happen. It's like, you kind of, like, check for, like, you know, the typical, like, Ash or Imperm, but then it's like, there's more complex, like, niche cards. I wouldn't say niche, but, you know, they're obviously less common than, like, Imperm. It's like, do I play around Droll? Do I play around Nibiru? Right? And, like, some of the most frustrating experiences, like, when I did the Immortal run, for example, was, like, I remember this one specific line, I was like, okay, I'm gonna play around Ash, but because I played around Ash, it meant that I got drolled so that I didn't do my best search first. I did my worst search first to try and check for Ash. But But then because I did that, the droll locked me out of searching again, and now I don't have the best card that I wanted to search because I got drolled. Like, those are some of the most frustrating things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there isn't really... It doesn't really feel like there's a skill to that. It feels very kind of RNG. It's like, choose what you want to play around. Statistically, Ash is more common, so I'll play around Ash, but then I ended up losing to Droll because of it. Like, that was one of the more frustrating things, I guess, about Yu-Gi-Oh's turn 1, is, like, choosing what you want to try and play around and what line you want to do that beats X card, depending on the format. There is skill in that? Well, I don't know. Is there really a skill in choosing to play around Droll versus Ash? Like, what is the skill there? I don't know. That feels very kind of like, pick a line, go for it, and see what happens type of thing. I don't know.
With cards like Ravenous Trap and Mindbreak Trap and the like, but they see comparatively less play to force variants.
I was red worse than blue.
And
Blue
way
seems like
less
the
than the
stun.
far more conditional hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Red
Whereas
is the aggro
if you're
deck,
baited
right?
in Ash Blossom, you may lead with
Risk
a search you
management
care
absolutely
less
matters.
about.
Well, that, but
if you're
yeah,
expecting your
ultimately
opponent
risk
to
management
draw
is going to have a
you,
degree of
then you need
variance
to add
in
your
it,
most
right?
important card from your deck to your hand first as quickly as
So
possible.
even if you like
And, of
statistically
course,
pick
knowing when
the one that you
actually
want to
should
play
use
around,
your
you can
various
still
hand
lose to
traps
like the
is
lower
also a skill.
statistically
Sure, you can look up a
likely one in the
YouTube guide
format,
about
etc.,
where to
etc.
hand trap various decks.
Like, you can look at a 60 card deck and you can be like, okay, well, my opponent's on 60 cards. They're less likely to have like interactive hand traps. They're more likely to have like board breakers. Like, those are reads like that you can realistically make that make sense. But if your opponent is on like 44 cards and they like droll you, it's like, I mean, I expected an Ash or a hand trap more, and then I don't know. But that's like saying poker takes no skill because you can't play around every pair of cards they could have. Well, by process of elimination is what poker comes from, right? Like, doing the math on like what they statistically could have based off of what's been revealed so far in the game, no? Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like everything's turn 1 type of thing.
But that can only get you so far when it comes to sticky situations where things just
I don't know
aren't
anything about
going
poker,
as
to be
normal.
fair, so I don't want to like
The hand trap game
get
is
into
something that is
debate.
emphasized more in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than any other card game out there. Hand traps are mostly relevant on the first turns of the game, whereas breaking apart boards comes up on the second turn of the game.
Isn't it funny that
joke
like
a lot about
hand traps are the best draw turn 1,
and getting every
and then
card in
after
your
that
hand
they're
negated.
completely dead?
But with how common hand traps are nowadays,
It's really rare you
this
draw
very
Ash Blossom
rarely
on turn
actually
4 and you're like,
happens.
yes,
However,
Ash
you'll
Blossom.
probably have to be playing into a board with some amount of disruption, and forcing this disruption out of your opponent properly is key when going second in Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the things that makes this so different to any other card game is that usually you can read all the interactions your opponent has available, but you won't know how they'll use them. You don't know when your opponent will use a Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, and most decks have enough extension that they might be able to play through one or two pieces of interaction like this. A lot of second turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are almost a game of chicken, one player waiting to use their interaction at the most optimal time, while the turn player tries to make them use it prematurely so they can pull off their combo. The fact that the most powerful interactions...
This is also, like, I suppose, where, like, the deepest part of Yu-Gi-Oh's gameplay comes from, right? Is, like, interactivity from cards that are on the field versus cards that are in the hand. It's like your opponent has 3 interruptions on the field. They have a Spirit Dragon, they have the Search Trap card, and they have a Drill Beam set. And that's a puzzle. And your goal on turn 2 is to figure out, how do I play through this with potentially a Veiler in the hand, because the deck does play Veiler, but they didn't search it, and you have to weigh up in your mind, do I think about that Veiler? And then you need your opponent to, in an ideal world, use their interactions poorly. You need to be able to use your cards in a way that forces out certain interactions, but still gives you enough resources to allow you to keep extending through, forcing out the Drill Beam, forcing out the Trap card, etc., etc. That's where so much of Yu-Gi-Oh! Skill comes from. But, you know, a lot of it is concentrated in one turn. Magic ban list is out? Oh my god. Okay, I'll check it out after this.
in the game is on monsters who are all on the field when they can use their effects, means that navigating that interaction is kind of flipped to how it works in most other card games. In games like Magic, or even in older Yu-Gi-Oh!, the interaction was on instants or trap cards, and the turn player would make plays and hope that their opponent doesn't have the out. However, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, the player whose information is all known is the player with the...
I feel like I'm looking at this card, I'm trying to judge if it's like good. I feel like this card is insane. Right? It's just a 1 mana tap for 3. Like, this can like trigger things. It can remove like certain stuff. Right? Like, it's just 3 damage, but it feels like that's kind of huge for like 1 mana. 30 years, never bettered. This is a 30-year-old card? Bottomless is pretty good. No, it's not dire. That's literally not true.
Interaction. So the turn player
What's the
is
term
the
in
only
Hearthstone?
one who
Like
needs
ping?
to have the out in the form
Like one of my
more
favorite
extension.
skills in
At the end of the day,
Hearthstone,
these
class
types
skills
of
is
high-powered combo
Fireball.
interactions are the main
Because it's a
skill that
mage
Yu-Gi-Oh
hero
tests
class
in the modern
ability. 2
day,
mana, just
which
ping
is
a card.
pretty
You can
different to
remove
how
a
the
divine
other two
shield.
biggest games play
You can
out.
trigger
Moving on to Magic, the
Death
game most similar to
Rattle,
Yu-Gi-Oh.
like just one ping,
Magic
like
also has a lot of instant
good.
speed interaction and hand trap equivalents. However, as we talked about before, they have far less hand trap style cards. Most interaction will be in the form of standard instant spells, which require keeping up mana to be used on your opponent's turn. We talked about this a bit before,
When are we getting
but it's
Evoker
worth
or
saying
Monk in
that
Hearthstone,
this
by
is
the
a
way?
skill all on its own. Knowing if you need to develop your board or if your resources are better spent trying to stop your opponent is something that comes with time, and it's a skill that games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon don't test thanks to just how different their resource systems are. Another big difference between Magic and the other two card games are its draw and search power, or more specifically, the lack of draw and search power in Magic. While Magic does get cards like Quick Study that allow you to simply draw 2 cards,
if you like are playing like a quote unquote combo deck in Magic, you kind of expect to do that combo almost every game, no? Right? It's not like every game in Magic is completely unique and different to every game, no? Right? Like you can still kind of get like a similar flow to a lot of the duels, you know? Which I feel like is one of the biggest criticisms of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like a lot of duels feel very similar. In that way, right? Or some variation of the combo. Depends. Magic has a billion draw cards, it just has a limited searching. You do combos in Magic with redundancy or time. There's some insane in draw tutors, but in general, draw and search is weaker than Yu-Gi-Oh! Well, that's the thing, right? Because like Yu-Gi-Oh! Like you can one thing that really stuck with me is that that React we did a year ago or something maybe. There was that VTuber who had like they basically quit Master Duel. Like they were pretty good as well. Like they got like high rank. They tried the game for the first time and they were talking about how like Pearly is a great example of it. Where like Pearly, like you're kind of just there doing the same duel every game. You're like resolving multiple Pearlies, you're getting your spells, you're beefing up your guy, you're making your towers, you're passing with some hand shot. It's like every single game was just that interaction, that loop, and it was just sort of going through the same sort of, you know, treadmill of, is my opponent going to imperm this? Are they going to droll me? Are they going to ash this part? And it's like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like if you play a certain archetype, it's just going to do that same thing all the time. Whereas, at least from Hearthstone, I'm talking about Hearthstone a lot because that's the game I have more experience with. It's like, there were a lot of similar games in Hearthstone. Like, you know, my opponent does this thing on 3 and I'm just like, well, that sucks. Or they do this thing on 5 and it's like, well, okay. But the games just felt different from varying from game to game. Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh! So many games just feel like you're going through like a very similar formula sometimes. And like it gets very repetitive. That's why Edison is like really good, right? Because Edison games are very varied. Depending on what you start with, what you draw, what your opening hand is. Like in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like most opening hands get you to where you want to go.
Whereas Pot of Greed is taking an extensive vacation on Yu-Gi-Oh's ban list, the actual impact of these cards is diminished in the average game. Since you have to spend mana on draw spells that you can't spend
3 mana draw 2? That's pretty, is that good? That's quite expensive, no? It's bad? Okay.
on playing creatures or playing interaction, many decks play
it's
few to
instant.
no cards that allow them to draw or search cards out of their deck.
Is that relevant? Like being able to draw on your opponent's turn? I guess you could draw more negates. But what's the difference between drawing on your turn or your opponent's turn, right? Like you're just trying to dig for like the quick plays to use on your opponent's turn. Because your mana doesn't reset on your opponent's turn. It's like, you know? It means you can gold interact. They can spend mana. If you float mana, you can use it for this. But if you float mana, why didn't you just use it? You might have triggers from draws. You can hold out mana in case you need it and then draw in their end phase. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so you want to float mana so that you can maybe bluff like counter. And then you don't actually counter them. You just use it in the end phase to like draw, for example. Interesting. Okay, that's cool.
Whereas nowadays, most Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon decks can draw half their decks on their first turn if they want to. This means that Magic is often
I don't think
less a game
Hearthstone
of
ever
finding
had
a
floating mana be a positive thing. I'm trying to think. I cannot think of any cards where floating was good. It was always bad to float mana on Hearthstone, I feel. Right? It does now? What have they done? what have they released? Uh-oh. Oh, shit, is it how did I turn a 20-minute video into a 40-minute react? Streamer brain, man.
Particular card that you need to win the game, and more
There's a
when
quest that
making
required you
the
to have mana
best
left at
of
the
what
end of the
cards you
turn?
do find. While there are
Quests?
decks
When was
built
that, like
around
4 years
particular
ago?
cards, these are usually dedicated combo decks. The average deck is built to be able to play even if you never draw a single copy of a particular card, which changes deck building and how you have to play the game turn by turn. Magic is a game about playing around variants.
I guess we're gonna miss the whole Pokemon section, damn. Alright, well, I might continue this after Chef, I suppose. But that's the react so far. It's been very eye-opening and interesting. All I've taken away from this is, man, I really want to play Magic. Bye-bye.